Welcome to Back on the Stack, a cEDH channel. Do you want to look fresh, all while showing your love for the cEDH community? Then check out our Bonfire site to shop for some of our logoed threads. Now, let's get right into it and see what decks are being piloted tonight.
Hey everyone, this is Ryan from Playing with Power MTG, and today I am playing Nixilis, Captive Kingpin. This deck is meant to grind the game and use Nixilis for card advantage. It can one-shot opponents with its commander or go for a combo with All Will Be One or Agatha's Soul Cauldron and Walking Ballista. In this game, I kept a slower hand due to the makeup of the table. It's a turn 2 pinger followed up by a turn 3 commander. I have a little bit of protection in case I need it early on.
What's up guys, Spuki here playing Pantlaza today. We have a tempo control build in Naya. The hand that we are looking at today is Verdant Catacombs, Savannah, Cursebringer, Dockside. We're just looking for some early action into Pantlaza to hopefully find our combo pieces to win the game. Let's see how it goes.
Hey everybody, it's Eli, and tonight I'm piloting Helga, Skittish Seer. This is a fun creature combo based Fant deck that seeks to utilize Helga's ability to tap for more and more mana to cast creatures with mana value 4 or greater. The main combos in the deck are Intruder Alarm and Ancestral Statue, Chakram Retriever and Ancestral Statue, and then Mist Hollow Griffin and Food Chain. You utilize Helga as an infinite mana outlet to draw your deck and win through Walking Ballista or Thassa's Oracle. Tonight I kept my 6 because it's lots of mana. I can get Helga out, hopefully turn 2, and then I have Breaching Hippocamp as a way to start pumping up Helga, drawing my deck, and utilizing Helga's ability.
Tonight I'm piloting Chatterfang, the Squirrel General. This deck seeks to win through Aristocrat line, synergizing with Chatterfang's ability. Unfortunately for me, I had to mold a 4. I decided to keep this hand with hopes of top decking a green mana source of any kind to be able to cast Calling Ritual, disrupting my opponent's game and setting me up with a ton of mana. Let's see how my luck turns out. With introductions out of the way, Ryan will kick us off. He draws and plays Forbidden Orchard for turn. He passes. Spuki draws and plays Verdant Catacombs for turn. He also passes. Eli draws and plays Temple Garden, shocking it in. He casts Llanowar Elves. He casts Mana Crypt. He passes. J-Rock draws and plays Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth as his land for turn. He casts Mana Crypt. He casts Soul Ring. He passes. Ryan draws and plays Spire of Industry for turn. He attempts to pass, but in response, Spuki pays a life, sacks Verdant Catacombs, and fetches up Stomping Grounds to the battlefield, tapped. The turn then moves to Spuki. Spuki draws and plays Savannah for turn. He passes. In his upkeep, Eli wins his script roll. He draws and plays Breeding Pool for turn, shocking it in. He casts his commander, Helga, Skittish Seer. He passes. In his upkeep, J-Rock wins his script roll. He draws and, missing a green source, moves through phases. In his end step, Ryan taps Forbidden Orchard for a black, giving a 1/1 spirit token to J-Rock. He then flashes in Orcish Bowmasters. It ETBs and he has it do 1 damage to the newly created spirit token. The turn then moves to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays Ancient Tomb as land for turn. He taps Forbidden Orchard for a black and Eli creates a 1/1 spirit token. He then uses the mana to help cast his commander, Nixilis, Captive Kingpin. He moves to combat and declares Orcish Bowmasters at J-Rock and the Orc Army at Spuki. They both take the damage and Ob triggers twice. Ryan puts 2 +1/+1 counters on Ob and exiles both Gamble and Wishclaw Talisman from the top of his library. They both go to exile for good and Ryan passes the turn. Spuki draws and plays Temple Garden for turn, shocking it in. He passes. In his upkeep, Eli loses his script roll. He draws and plays Flooded Strand as land for turn. He casts Polywog Prodigy. He casts Breaching Hippocamp. Helga triggers and he draws a card, gains a life, and puts a 1/1 counter on Helga. Bowmaster triggers and Ryan has a ping Eli in the face. Ob triggers and Ryan adds a +1/+1 counter and exiles Jessica's Will. Then Breaching Hippocamp ETBs and he untaps Helga. Polywog's Evolve mechanic also triggers from the ETB and he adds a +1/+1 counter to Polywog. He then passes the turn. In his upkeep, J-Rock wins his script roll. He draws and again has to pass the turn. Ryan draws and immediately goes to combat. He swings Bowmasters at J-Rock and Ob at Eli. They both take the damage. Ob triggers from the Bowmasters damage. Ryan adds a counter and exiles Scalding Tarn from the top of his library. He plays City of Traders for turn. He casts Mox Opal. Polywog triggers and Eli draws. Bowmaster triggers and Ryan has a ping Eli in the face. Ob triggers and Ryan adds a counter and exiles Cloudstone Curio. Ryan casts Jessica's Will from exile, targeting Eli and choosing both modes. It resolves and he adds 4 red to his mana pool and exiles Diabolic Intent, Cabal Ritual, and Final Fortune. He casts Cloudstone Curio from exile. He taps Forbidden Orchard for a black, allowing Eli to create another spirit token. He casts Cabal Ritual without Threshold. It resolves and he adds 3 black to his mana pool. He casts Diabolic Intent, sacrificing his Orc army as an additional cost. It resolves and he tutors a card to hand. He casts Saw in Half, targeting Orcish Bowmasters. It resolves and he creates 2 token copies of Bowmasters. They ETB and he has them both ping Eli in the face. Then he amasses an Orc army. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles Polluted Delta and Mana Crypt. He casts the Mana Crypt. Polywog triggers and Eli draws. Both Bowmasters trigger and Ryan pings Eli in the face with both of them. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles Chrome Mox and Lightning Bolt. He casts the Chrome Mox. Polywog triggers and Eli draws. Both Bowmasters trigger and Ryan pings Eli in the face with both of them. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles Defense Grid and Reckless Fireweaver. Chrome Mox then ETBs and he imprints Necropotence. Ryan then moves to his end step. The exiled cards with Ob then stay in exile for good, and the turn moves to Spuki. Spuki draws and plays Mana Confluence. He casts Dockside Extortionist. It ETBs and he creates 7 treasure tokens. He casts his commander, Pantlaza. It ETBs and he discovers 4. He reveals Veil of Summer from the top of his library. He chooses not to cast it and it goes to hand. He casts Dauntless Dismantler. In response, Ryan casts Tibalt's Trickery, targeting Dauntless. In response, Spuki casts Veil of Summer. Polywog triggers and Eli draws. Both Bowmasters trigger and Ryan has them both ping Spuki in the face. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles Mox Amber and Unstable Amulet. Then Veil resolves. It should be noted that the rulings for Tibalt's Trickery actually state that Tibalt's Trickery can target a spell that can't be countered, and if Tibalt's Trickery resolves, the target spell won't be countered, but all of the other effects will still happen. So, Spuki chooses the number 2 at random, mills 1 card, which is a Horizon Canopy, and then exiles cards from the top of his library until he exiles a non-land card which he may cast for free. He exiles Wild Growth. He casts it for free. Polywog triggers and Eli draws. Both Bowmasters trigger and Ryan pings J-Rock in the face with both of them. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles Goblin Engineer and Mayhem Devil. Then Dauntless resolves. Spuki attempts to move through phases, and in response, Eli taps Flooded Strand, pays a life, and attempts to fetch. Ob triggers and Ryan adds a counter and exiles Mana Confluence. Then, Eli fetches up Hallowed Fountain onto the battlefield tapped. The turn then moves to Eli. In his upkeep, Eli wins his Crypt roll. He draws and plays Tundra for turn. He taps Helga for 2 blue and casts Chakram Retriever. Helga triggers and he draws a card, gains a life, and adds a 1/1 counter to Helga. Both Bowmasters trigger and Ryan has them both ping Dauntless Dismantler. Eli casts Enlightened Tutor. Chakram Retriever triggers and he untaps Helga. He holds priority and casts Chord of Calling where X equals 4. Chakram Retriever triggers and he untaps Helga. Chord resolves and he tutors Ancestral Statue to the battlefield. It ETBs and he returns it to hand. Polywog's Evolve mechanic also triggers from the ETB and he adds a +1/+1 counter to Polywog. Then Enlightened Tutor resolves and Eli tutors Walking Ballista to the top of his library. He taps Helga to cast Ancestral Statue again. Helga triggers, Eli draws a card, gains a life, and puts a counter on Helga. Both Bowmasters trigger and Ryan pings Helga with both. Chakram Retriever triggers and he untaps Helga. Ancestral Statue then ETBs and his trigger goes on the stack with Eli returning it to the hand. Eli taps Helga for 4, casting Ancestral Statue again, triggering Helga, triggering both Bowmasters. Ryan pings Helga with both. Chakram untaps Helga and Ancestral Statue is bounced to Eli's hand again. Eli repeats this process one more time, drawing a card, triggering Bowmasters, and Ryan puts 2 more damage on Helga. Eli then taps Helga to help cast Walking Ballista, where X equals 2. Helga triggers, and in response, Spuki taps his Mana Confluence to float a white. Ob triggers, and Ryan adds a counter and exiles Bolus's Citadel. Spuki then casts Soul Partition, targeting Helga. Polywog triggers, and Eli draws. Both Bowmasters trigger, and Ryan pings Helga with both for lethal. Then Soul Partition fizzles. Helga's delayed trigger then resolves, Eli draws a card and gains a life. Both Bowmasters trigger, and Ryan sends both pings and Dauntless Dismantler for lethal. Then Walking Ballista resolves. Eli uses his floating mana to cast Mist Hollow Griffin. He moves through phases, discarding the hand size, and passes the turn. In his upkeep, J-Rock loses his Crypt roll. He draws and plays Urza's Saga for turn, adding 1 lore counter. Still without any green mana source, he passes the turn. In his upkeep, Ryan wins his Crypt roll. He draws and immediately casts Bolas's Citadel, tapping Forbidden Orchard and giving Eli a 1/1 Spirit. In response, Eli removes both counters from Walking Ballista, pinging both copies of Ryan's Orcish Bowmasters for lethal. Then, Citadel resolves. Ryan pays 1 life to cast Vampiric Tutor from the top of his library. Polywog triggers and Eli draws. In response, Eli pays 2 life and casts Mental Misstep. It resolves and counters Vamp Tutor. Ryan casts Mox Amber from exile. Polywog triggers and Eli draws. In response, Eli casts Force of Vigor for its alternative casting cost, exiling Noble Hierarch, targeting Bolas's Citadel and Cloudstone Curio. It resolves and destroys both targets. Ryan then plays Bloodstained Mire for turn. City of Traitors triggers and he sacrifices it. He pays a life, sacks the Bloodstained Mire, and fetches a Blood Crypt onto the battlefield, shocking it in. Ryan casts Unstable Amulet. Polywog triggers and Eli draws. It ETBs and Ryan gains 2 energy. He taps it right away, paying both energy to exile a card, which is Reanimate. Ryan casts the Reanimate, targeting Orcish Bowmasters in his graveyard. Unstable Amulet and Polywog both trigger. Eli draws a card and each opponent is dealt 1 damage. Ob triggers, Ryan adds a counter and exiles Rolling Vortex. Then Reanimate resolves, returning Orcish Bowmaster to the battlefield, and Ryan loses 2 life. Bowmaster's ETBs and Ryan has it ping Spuki in the face. Ob triggers, Ryan adds a counter and exiles Deadly Rolick. He moves to combat and declares Ob at Eli and his 17/17 Orc army at J-Rock. They both declare no blocks and take the damage. Eli is then eliminated from Ob Nixilis commander damage. In his second main phase, Ryan casts Deadly Rolick from exile, targeting Dockside. Unstable Amulet triggers and each opponent takes 1 damage. Ob triggers, Ryan adds a counter and exiles Disciple of the Vault. Then Deadly Rolick exiles Dockside. Ryan casts Goblin Engineer from exile. Unstable Amulet triggers, each opponent takes a life. Ob triggers, Ryan adds a counter and exiles Grinding Station. Goblin Engineer then ETBs and Ryan entombs Walking Ballista. Ryan then moves through phases and passes the turn. Spuki draws and immediately casts Cursed Mirror. It ETBs and he has it enter as a copy of Pantlaza. He sacrifices the original copy of Pantlaza to the Legend rule. Because the original Pantlaza also saw a Dinosaur ETB, Spuki gets 2 Discover 4 triggers. With the first trigger, he reveals Finale of Devastation and puts it to hand. With the second trigger, he reveals and casts Sanctum Weaver. He moves through phases and passes. In his upkeep, J-Rock loses his Crypt roll. He adds a counter to Urza's Saga and draws. He plays Phyrexian Tower for turn. He laughs at the very poor showing of Chatterfang and unfortunately has to pass the turn. In his upkeep, Ryan loses his Crypt roll. He draws and immediately moves to combat. He declares his Orc army and Bowmasters both at J-Rock and Ob at Spuki. In response, Spuki taps his Mana Confluence for white. Ob triggers, Ryan adds a counter and exiles Firebrand Archer. Spuki then casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Ob. It resolves, sending Ob back to the command zone, and Ryan gains 24 life. Still in response to declare attackers, J-Rock taps his Urza's Saga and creates a Construct creature token. He then blocks the Orc army with the Construct and takes 1 from Bowmasters. In his second main phase, Ryan recasts Ob Nixilis. It should be noted that Unstable Amulet should have triggered here as well, but the table all missed it. Ryan activates Goblin Engineer, sacrificing Mox Opal, returning Cloudstone Curio to the battlefield. He casts Firebrand Archer from exile. Unstable Amulet triggers, and each opponent loses 1 life. Ob triggers, he adds a counter and exiles Dark Ritual. Cloudstone triggers, and he returns Orcish Bowmasters to hand. He taps Forbidden Orchard, giving a 1/1 Spirit to J-Rock. He casts Dark Ritual from exile. Firebrand Archer and Unstable Amulet both trigger. Both opponents lose 2 life. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles both Soul Ring and Imperial Recruiter. Dark Ritual resolves, and he adds 3 black to his mana pool. He casts Soul Ring from exile. Firebrand Archer and Unstable Amulet both trigger. Both opponents lose 2 life. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles both Deflecting Swat and Jewed Lotus. He casts Jewed Lotus from exile. Firebrand and Unstable both trigger. Both opponents lose 2 life. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles both Wheel of Fortune and Yawgmoth's Will. Ryan cracks his Jewed Lotus to add 3 red commander mana. He casts Yawgmoth's Will from exile. Firebrand and Unstable both trigger. Both opponents lose 2 life and J-Rock is then eliminated. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles both Mount Doom and Imperial Seal. Ryan casts Jewed Lotus from his graveyard. Firebrand Archer and Unstable Amulet both trigger. Spuki loses 2 life. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles both Underworld Breach and Dualcaster Mage. He casts Mox Opal from his graveyard. Firebrand and Unstable both trigger. Spuki loses 2 life. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles both a basic Swamp and Pyroblast. He casts Dark Ritual from his graveyard. Firebrand and Unstable both trigger. Spuki loses 2 more. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles both Cabal Pit and Lion's Eye Diamond. He casts LED. Firebrand Archer and Unstable Amulet both trigger. Spuki loses 2 life. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles Culling the Weak and Sulphurous Springs. He casts Cabal Ritual with Threshold from his graveyard. Firebrand and Unstable both trigger. Spuki loses 2 life. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles Kessig Firebreather and Pyretic Ritual. He casts Deadly Relic from his graveyard. Firebrand and Unstable both trigger. Spuki loses 2 more. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles Warrior's Oath, and all will be 1. He sacrifices LED and adds 3 red to his mana pool, discarding his hand. He casts All Will Be 1. Firebrand Archer and Unstable Amulet both trigger. Spuki loses 2 life. Ob triggers twice. Ryan adds 2 counters and exiles Marsh Flats and Agatha's Soul Cauldron. He casts the Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Firebrand Archer and Unstable Amulet both trigger, pinging Spuki separately. Ob gets a counter for each, which both trigger All Will Be 1, pinging Spuki to death, and Ryan wins the game. Well, even if that wasn't the most balanced pod, we got to experience a wild game. Eli was able to show the capabilities of a new Bloomborough commander and nearly pulled off the win. However, Ryan's Ob Nixilis deck was almost unstoppable, and in the end he was able to kill each opponent through combat and single pings. The entire crew over here wants to thank Ryan for taking time out of his schedule to play a long night of Magic with us. He was a blast to hang out with. Feel free to check out the deck links listed below, and we will see you back on the stack.
Pay 4 to cast a Breaching Hippocamp.
A who?
Breaching Hippocamp.
Hippocamp is just a elemental, right?
It's a horsefish.
A horsefish, my bad.
Come on,
I
man.
appreciate the clarification. Horsefish, got it. Horsefish. I'm glad you let me know. Horsefish, what in the world is that stupid card?